Good morning and welcome. I offer a special welcome today to those who are joining us from Highland Baptist Church. It's my privilege to share with both congregations today, as it will be Das Sydney's privilege to do the same on August 16. Engaging in this way reminds us that we are part of a larger family and that we are each stronger on account of that connection. It's wonderful that we can cooperate with each other. So again, I say welcome, and may God continue to bless Glen Acres, but also Highland Baptist Church as well. Welcome today. Last Sunday, I began a short series under the heading, Learning to Be Good News. It has struck me this summer that we have been inundated with what we might consider to be negative news for much of 2020. Along with that observation, I've been reminded that as people who have embraced the good news of Jesus, God desires that each of us will embody that news, that good news, to the world that we find ourselves in. Last week we considered John 15 and the challenge to remain and abide in Jesus. We saw how that was foundational in order for God to develop each of us into people who can embody the good news. Just as an IV drip channels helpful fluids into a body that needs help from those fluids, so as we are connected to Jesus, we are able to receive all of his character and all of the aspects that he would like to pour into our lives. The words of Jesus in Matthew 25 are fascinating. They are part of what is considered the Olivet Discourse, so named on account of it taking place on the Mount of Olives. This was a mountain ridge east of the old city of Jerusalem, which in Jesus' day would have been covered in olive groves. Listen as I read verses 31 to 40. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" The king will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, so you did it to me." Here we see Jesus' love and compassion for the marginalized of society. His words shouldn't have surprised his disciples. We know at the beginning of his ministry, he went to the synagogue in his hometown of Nazareth, and he read from Isaiah chapter 61. He read words about recovery of sight to the blind and about good news for the poor and about the oppressed going free. And he said that today those words were coming true in their presence. And on another occasion, when the Pharisees, in an attempt to trap Jesus, asked him which commandment of the law was the greatest, he first responded as they would have expected, noting that it was to love God with all of their being. But then he added the second greatest commandment, kind of a bonus answer to the question, if you will. Even though they hadn't asked, he said that the second greatest command was that one ought to love one's neighbor as themselves. Here he's painting us a picture of what that looks like in real life. Archibald Hunter, the commentator, says, "Few passages so disclose the mind of Christ as this one does. None teaches more clearly that he who holds in his hands the destiny of all men and women cares so much about the least the last, and the lost. This is the Messiah whom we worship. He cares about the least, the last, and the lost. This is the Messiah, not only whom we worship, but who we seek to be like, who we seek to follow. And by association, that means that we too will care about the least, the last, and the lost. Well, in this story, I want to make a few observations. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that the future looks to be amazing. Verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. The one who first came in humility will one day come in great splendor. The one who humbled himself to the birth in Bethlehem, the one who humbled himself to use carpentry tools in Nazareth, and to an itinerant preaching ministry with a ragtag group of followers, the one who humbled himself to death on a cursed cross, will come again. But unlike the first time, this arrival, this coming will be glorious and will be a display of great power. On account of COVID-19, many of us are feeling disconnected, tired, worn out, and even perhaps a little depressed. A verse like this should give us hope. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, indeed, this will happen. Maybe you're thinking the wrongs of life will never be righted. Maybe you wonder whether faith makes any difference. Well, here we see the future, and it's going to be amazing. Even though right now, you and I are part of a difficult time, there is coming a day when we as followers of Jesus will be part of a very special time, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him. Then he will sit on the throne of his glory. I think it's good to think about these images from time to time. Not only will the future be quite amazing, but it will also be a time of accountability. Verse 32, all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. In Palestine, the sheep and the goats would pasture together during the daytime. At nighttime, the shepherd would take the goats into a cave or another enclosed area for the night, as they were sensitive to the cool. The sheep, on the other hand, are fine in the open. They prefer the fresh air, and they're not as sensitive to the cool. What will the kingdom of heaven be like? Well, it will be about accountability, and it will be about giving account and receiving one's reward or not. This is all part of the kingdom dynamic. The image of the sheep and the goats is used by Jesus to show how the king will separate true disciples from all the others at the last day. So when this time of accountability comes, it will be good news for some. In verse 34, we read that Jesus, speaking to those who are on the right, the sheep, the king is reported to say, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Now, the criteria for a shepherd when he goes to separate the sheep and the goats is quite clear. A first century shepherd, or a shepherd of any time, would never make a mistake. You or I might make a mistake if a sheep had its wool cut off. We might wonder if this is a sheep or a goat, but a shepherd would never make that mistake. Well, what is the criteria in this story? When explaining the criteria for the king, the following reference points are noted. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Tangible acts. In Jesus, in this story, the people on the right are dumbfounded, as they don't remember doing any of the above. Surely, if they'd seen the king in prison and had visited him, they would remember. Or if he'd been hungry and they'd given him food, they would recall that. But verse 40 is the key. Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. The people who are classified as the sheep, the ones who this is a good news day, their lives demonstrated clearly that the love of God had flooded their hearts and was spilling over from them to the hurting, the marginalized, the disadvantaged people that they came in contact with. Their connection to Jesus had enabled them to become good news to the people around them. It wasn't something that was calculated on their part. It happened quite naturally because of their connection to Jesus. Once we receive God's love, once we invite Jesus into our lives, we then have both the inclination and the capacity to love and reach out in this way. It's our connection to the vine. It's our connection to Jesus that allows this. These good qualities from him start to flow into your life and my life. Jesus, in the story, refers to the people that have been helped, the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, and so forth, as members of my family. And that if you've done it to them, you've done it to me. It's a fascinating way of looking at it. Those of us who are parents, we know that our children are extensions of ourselves. We share their joy, and we share their pain in a way that is unique. God has a similar perspective on all of humanity. For God so loved the world. There's not a person who's ever been born whose name God hasn't known and whom God has not loved and cared for. If my child was injured and someone attended to them, I would be most appreciative. It would be like they had actually helped me, even though they would have helped my son or my daughter. In the parable, the reference is to the Lord himself, the Maker. You've reached out and helped one of these ones, one of the least of these, who were a stranger, who were hungry, who were thirsty, who were sick, in prison, naked. It's like you've helped me, Jesus says. The person who lives like this sometimes looks like a fool to others. It appears like they are wasting their time, their talents, and maybe their money. People sometimes can't understand why they would forgo personal pleasure and privilege for someone who is a nobody in the eyes of many. But we know that there are not any nobodies in the world. Everyone is special. Everyone is loved by God. And so we see that the story has a good news aspect for those who are on the right, those who've been connected to Jesus and have become good news for their world. Unfortunately, there's not such good news for some others. In verses 41 to 46, we see this played out. In the analogy Jesus uses, the ones who are labeled as goats on the day of judgment do not have a positive future waiting for them. These are the ones who, devoid of a meaningful relationship with Jesus, have lived life only for themselves. They have lived selfishly with closed hearts and hands. So Jesus repeats those same categories. I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink, and so on. Just as the first group, this group is puzzled as to when any of these scenarios actually played themselves out in their lives. Certainly, if they'd seen this king hungry or thirsty or in prison or sick, they would have come to his aid. They don't remember it. But in verse 45, again, the punchline, truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. You saw one of my children and you did not respond. And it's like you saw me and did not respond, says Jesus. These people might have mouthed the words and given lip service to Jesus here and there. They may have said that they believe in Jesus, but their lives have not demonstrated any transformation. Their lives have not reflected the fact that they are connected to the vine and the good nutrients from the vine are flowing into them, changing them, Their lives don't reveal that in any tangible way. There are hurting people all around them, but their hearts are untouched by the love and compassion of God. They are oblivious, or at least callously unresponsive to what they see around them. They display no evidence of being attached to Jesus. I really like this quote from Greg Lindsay. He preached a sermon entitled God and Salvation, and he says, "It is not just about you and I having our eyes on Jesus. It is not just about you and I having our eyes on Jesus. It's about you and I learning to have the eyes of Jesus for everyone. It's about you and I learning to have the eyes of Jesus for everyone." As you and I know from the current Black Lives Matter movement, we create problems for ourselves and society when we allow people to be treated differently, whether it be on account of race, culture, religious, or socioeconomic reasons. Learning to be good news means we treat everyone with respect and honor and dignity. Learning to be good news means we treat everyone as if they're a child of the King. And by doing so, we treat them in a way as if we would treat Jesus himself. Perhaps you've heard the story, The Rabbi's Gift. I've shared it before at Glen Acres. It's a parable. I'm sure it's a story that has been crafted with a great meaning, I think. Here's an abbreviated version by Ivan Grant from the original from Scott Peck, found in The Different Drum. A certain monastery had fallen upon hard times. A once great order had lost all its branch houses, to the extent that there were only 5 monks left in the decaying mother house, the abbot and 4 others, all of considerable age. In the woods surrounding the monastery, there was a little hut, and it was sometimes used by a rabbi in the town as a retreat. The old monks always seemed to know when the rabbi was there. "The rabbi is in the woods again," they whisper to each other. At one such time, the abbot decided to visit the rabbi on the off chance that he might have some advice for saving the monastery. The rabbi welcomed the abbot to his hut, but could offer no solution to the problem. His congregation too had dwindled, and together they wept at what had been lost. At the time of parting, and after quietly sharing the deeper things in their hearts, they embraced, and the abbot said, I have failed in the purpose of my visit. Is there no advice you can give me to save my dying order?" "No, I don't have any advice," the rabbi replied. "The only thing I can tell you is that the Messiah is one of you." When the abbot returned to the monastery, he related what had happened, including the rather cryptic statement that the Messiah was one of them. In the days and months that followed, the old monks pondered this, and whether there might be any possible significance to the rabbi's words. Could it really mean that the Messiah is one of us here at the monastery? And if so, who? Could he have meant the abbot? Most likely. He has been our leader for many years. On the other hand, what about Brother Thomas? He is certainly a holy man. Everyone knows him as a man of light. Surely he couldn't have meant Brother Eldred. He's often so crotchety. On the other hand, when you look at it, Eldred is nearly always right. Maybe the rabbi did mean him. Definitely not Brother Philip. He's so passive, rather a nobody. But then he does have this wonderful gift of being there when you need him. He just seems to appear. Maybe Philip is the Messiah. Of course, the rabbi didn't mean me. He couldn't possibly mean me. I'm very ordinary. But what if he did? Suppose I'm the Messiah. Oh God, I couldn't be that much for you, could I? As the monks pondered, they began to treat each other with extraordinary respect on the off chance that one of them just might be the Messiah. And because each might himself be the Messiah, they began to treat themselves with extraordinary respect. So it was that the occasional strollers and picnickers in this beautiful forest sometimes visited the dilapidated chapel to meditate. And almost unconsciously, they sensed this aura of extraordinary respect that surrounded and seemed to radiate from the 5 monks. There was something strangely attractive, even compelling about the atmosphere of the place. It drew visitors back frequently to share some of this inner strength and peace. They began to bring friends to this special place, and their friends brought friends, and those friends brought friends. Slowly, there was more and more contact with the old monks, till one visitor asked if he could join them, then another, and then another. And within a few years, the monastery became a thriving order and a vibrant center of wisdom and light, thanks to the Rabbi's gift. One of you is the Messiah. As we learn to be good news to our world right now, I think we learn to treat others as if they were Jesus. We learn to treat others with respect and with honor, just like they're a child of the Lord. Let's bow in prayer. Our God, we give you thanks for this wonderful story told by Jesus. We are humbled by what we have read. We ask that you will work in our lives to help us become what you want us to be. We ask that we might become the good news that you'd like us to be for our world. We see some direction in this passage. May we stay close to Jesus, connected to the vine. May we be able to see people the way you would like us to see people. May we reach out for your glory and honor to all people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.